In the dusty heart of a small Midwestern town, 35-year-old mechanic Zara Trent wiped grease from her hands and squinted at the unfamiliar silhouette pulling into her shopyard. The vehicle was no ordinary machine. It was an experimental, armored tank prototype with complex hydraulic systems and composite internals. Locals gathered in curiosity, whispering about the army convoy that had passed through hours ago. Zara had seen her share of broken-down pickups and rusted farm tractors, but nothing close to this. Out stepped a gruff man in a pressed grey suit, General McCullen, flanked by engineers and military aides. "This thing hasn't moved in 3 weeks," he said grimly. 20 specialists failed. If you fix it, there's 10 grand in it. For you and your shop's reputation." She glanced at the tank, then at her old tools. It wasn't the money that made her nod. It was the challenge. The impossible was personal to Zara. Word spread quickly in the town. The same Zara who once fixed a town mayor's car with 2 hairpins and chewing gum was now facing off against a tank. Crowds lingered just beyond the rope the military had put up, eyes wide with a mix of hope and doubt. Zara's dad, once a mechanic for a nearby base, had taught her to listen to machines like they spoke in riddles. "They don't break without warning," he used to say. "They whisper first." She walked circles around the tank, listening, looking, studying it like a puzzle box. The onboard computer system was fried, no response. Hydraulic servos hissed and leaked, fuel lines tangled. Like spaghetti. The engineers had tried standard protocol repairs. Zara knew she'd have to go rogue. She asked for access to the wiring diagrams, was refused. That night, she snuck into her garage and pulled out her father's old notebooks. If she couldn't get modern specs, she'd rebuild from intuition. Day 2 began with blistering heat and quiet tension. General McCullen watched from a shaded tent, arms folded. Zara didn't speak much, just started disassembling one panel at a time with tools she customized herself. As bolts clanked to the floor and wires dangled like exposed nerves, she made a mental map of the machine's nervous system. With no access to military-grade processors, she soldered together a temporary control bypass using scrap radio boards and a salvaged ECU from an old Cadillac. One engineer scoffed loudly, "She's building a time bomb, not fixing a tank." Zara smiled without looking up. "Then stand back." She worked until dusk, hands blackened, sweat stinging her eyes, fingers bleeding. But by nightfall, the main engine bay finally hummed softly when she engaged the test power line. She hadn't fixed it, but the machine was listening now. Besides, the third day brought both skepticism and support. A few of the engineers had begun to hang back, not to mock, but to observe. Zara's approach was nothing like theirs. She treated the tank not as a war machine, but as a beast that needed calming. When one servo refused to cooperate, she realigned it manually, turning gears with her shoulder against a pry bar. When a sensor tripped and sent error codes across her crude interface, she manually traced the fault to a melted connector and fabricated a substitute from an old motorcycle part. By noon, the tank's internal systems lit up like Christmas. Still, no movement. McCullen remained silent. Everyone could sense that the breakthrough, if any, would come soon, or not at all. Zara didn't speak to anyone even when blisters burst on her palms. Her silence was her determination. Her breath quickened every time she turned the starter, and the engine coughed louder with each try. On the 4th day, just as tension peaked, a quiet rumble filled the shop. Not loud, not aggressive, but deep, steady, and alive. Zara had barely pressed the ignition control before the tank's engine fired up, like it had just woken from a coma. Mechanics gasped. One young engineer dropped his tablet. The tank didn't just start, it moved. It rolled forward 6 feet, the gears catching perfectly, brakes hissing cleanly. Zara stepped back, wiping her face with a dirty cloth. General McCullen stood frozen, then slowly removed his sunglasses. "How the hell?" he muttered. "You did it." Cameras clicked. Civilians erupted into cheers outside the gate. Zara looked at the crowd, then back at the tank, then at her father's notebook tucked into her back pocket. "I just listened," she said softly. And for a long moment, no one said anything. Because they all knew what had just happened wasn't just a repair, it was a revolution. But just when she thought the job was done, reality snapped back. A stern man from the logistics team approached McCullen with a folder. "Sir, she's not licensed to handle military assets. We could face penalties." McCullen's jaw clenched. Turning to Zara, he said, "I'm sorry, but we have to report this breach." Hours later, Zara was handed a termination notice from the local subcontractor who had loaned her garage space for this project. They feared military fallout. Her tools were boxed. Her name, once cheered, was now tied to controversy. She didn't cry, but her hands trembled as she packed. All she'd done was succeed where others had failed. Yet somehow, success wasn't protection. As she walked away from the now operational tank, feeling more defeated than ever, a sleek black car pulled up beside her. The door opened. McCullen stepped out again, this time alone, holding a sealed envelope. "You may have lost a job," he said, "but how would you like a contract with the Pentagon?" Her eyes widened. Everything was about to change. The tank's monstrous engine groaned again as Malik, the 35-year-old mechanic from the dusty outskirts, stood before it like a surgeon over a patient no one else dared touch. The military engineers watched with folded arms, amused at first, but now there was a different kind of silence among them. Malik had asked for just two things: time and silence. By dawn, he had disassembled the main turbine intake unit, a maze of gears, magneto modules, and sealed combustion systems. The unfixable part wasn't just physical. It was electronically coded to sync with a system only accessible to Pentagon-level engineers. Yet Malik, relying on his decades of tinkering with abandoned military machines, improvised his way through it. He used copper thread from an old watch coil, resoldered the microcircuits with a pen-sized heat tool, and rewired the grounding like an artist restoring a masterpiece. He even carved a missing gear tooth using scrap aluminum and a nail file. At exactly 7:12 a.m., Malik stepped back. "Try it," he said. The general, an old, broad-shouldered man with years of battlefield under his belt, glanced skeptically at his tech team. One nodded and pressed the ignition. The tank engine rumbled, then it roared. Not just roared, purred. Every soldier and engineer present froze. The thing hadn't run in 3 years. Its ignition was declared impossible by LockPro, a top defense contractor, but there it was, vibrating smoothly like it had just rolled off the production floor. The general's mouth hung slightly open. Then, in classic military fashion, he barked, "Shut it down." The team obeyed instantly. Silence returned, except for the sound of Malik wiping the grease off his hands. "How did you bypass the dual-encoded ignition?" an engineer asked. Malik smiled faintly. "Didn't need to. I just made the engine forget it ever needed one." The general walked up slowly, hands behind his back. "Son, who trained you?" Malik replied, "Life. You've just done something 40 of my best engineers couldn't." "I only did what I was challenged to," Malik said humbly. The general stared at him. "Follow me." By noon, Malik was sitting in a room with polished oak panels and military seals on the walls. The general paced slowly, then turned and dropped a manila folder on the table in front of Malik. "This is from the Pentagon," the general said. "They want to see you." Malik blinked. "Me?" "They saw the tank test. We streamed it live. To HQ." the general explained. They want someone who doesn't think inside the blueprint. You just salvaged a $30 million unit from the grave. Imagine what you could do with resources. I'm just a local mechanic, Malik protested. I don't have formal papers, security clearance. You do now, the general interrupted, tapping the folder. Malik opened it and gasped. Inside were authorization badges, a temporary Pentagon engineer ID, and, most startling of all, a contract. 6-month probation period, the general said. Full clearance, triple pay, housing. If you perform, they'll keep you. I don't know what to say. Say yes, the general said, then extended his hand. Malik shook it, still in disbelief. Days later, Malik found himself walking through the vast corridors of a secured government engineering complex in Virginia. Here, men and women in suits typed rapid-fire commands into terminals while robots moved prototype parts on suspended magnetic rails. His escort, a young lieutenant, showed him to Lab 47A. There, an old aircraft drone, declared irreparable, lay in parts across 3 tables. Malik was told, "You're up." He rolled up his sleeves. Months passed. Malik's reputation grew. His strange, intuitive approach to repairs, often using unconventional tools and thinking sideways through problems, stumped even seasoned PhDs. But it worked. One day, in a closed Pentagon meeting room, a presentation was held titled Civilian Innovation, Case Study, Malik the Mechanic. Officials from Lockheed Martin, Raytheon and Northrop Grumman attended. They watched video after video of Malik resurrecting engines, drones and sensor systems once deemed trash. The final video was of that tank, the one that started it all. The presenter, a senior defense analyst, declared, "This man is living. Proof that raw talent, even without formal training, can rival institutional engineering." At the end, the general who once challenged Malik said to the room, "He was a gamble. Now he's our secret weapon." Meanwhile, back in his home village, Malik's small garage had become a shrine. Young boys who once fetched him bolts now told visitors, "That's where the Pentagon guy used to fix scooters." The dusty town saw new roads built, courtesy of a quiet donation made in Malik's name. A local school added a mechanical training workshop with a plaque that read, "Dedicated to Malik," who proved that genius needs no permission.